I was halfway through slicing my father's birthday cake when he raised his glass and, with the entire table watching, told me I was a dropout pretending to be somebody and to get out of his house. 3 weeks later, he stood on the flagstone of my oceanfront deck, staring through floor-to-ceiling glass at a life he hadn't believed I could build, a headquarters on the water, a company worth more than the subdivision he bragged about, and a daughter who no longer needed his approval. I will never forget the way his jaw stopped moving, like someone had pressed pause on the old family movie we'd rerun my entire life. Before I tell you how we got from that dinner to that door, drop a comment with where you're listening from, and hit subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have been cheering for you the loudest. This one's for the scrappy folks who took the long way around. My name is Mara Quinn. I'm 32. I never finished college. And I own a company valued at $24 million. I grew up in a neighborhood where the houses were square, the lawns were tidy, and the life plan was laminated. Graduate high school, go to college, get a real job, marry someone respectable, buy in a better school district, repeat. We lived on the east side of Wichita, Kansas. My dad, Gerald Jerry Quinn, wore a tie to work every day at a mid-sized accounting firm and believed credentials were the bedrock of civilization. My mother, Maureen, ran the school library and cataloged success the way she cataloged books, by category and call number. My older brother, Kyle, was a varsity everything who went on to study finance. My younger sister, Brittany, could have been the poster child for student government. And then there was me, the kid who stapled hand-drawn flyers to telephone poles advertising dog walking, plant watering, and homework notes for $2, and who learned early that the best way to get someone to buy lemonade was to offer a buy two, get a cookie-free deal if they came back on Saturday. When I was 10, I turned our garage into a weekend shop. I sold friendship bracelets I had woven while watching reruns, and bundles of homegrown basil I coaxed from coffee cans on the sill. I even made punch cards with tiny stars drawn in blue marker because repeat customers deserve a reward. It's cute, Dad said, ruffling my hair. But cute won't get you a career, kiddo. Focus on school. The world takes degrees seriously. I tried. Truly. I did homework at the kitchen table while watching unboxing videos to study how strangers created delight out of cardboard and tape. In high school, I worked at a local tech store after classes and fixed neighbors' laptops for $20 when the official repair desk charged $80. I liked the feeling of solving a problem and watching someone's shoulders relax when the photos of their grandbabies reappeared. For prom, while my friends compared dresses, I launched a tiny shop online selling custom phone cases I made with a borrowed heat press. I learned SEO because I couldn't afford ads. I made about $1,800 the spring of senior year and hid the cash in an oatmeal container, too afraid to tell my parents in case they said it was a distraction. I enrolled at Sedgwick County Community College the way you do when you're trying to love someone else's dream. I lasted one semester. It wasn't that I couldn't handle the classes, I could. It was that I felt like a thoroughbred in a circular pen, trotting the same laps while the open field simmered just beyond the fence. My business professor had never run a business. He taught marketing from a textbook that never once mentioned the word cart abandonment. I read case studies about brands with budgets bigger than my entire hometown and wondered how any of it helped me help a real person sell leather belts he made in his garage. Dad, I said around our dining room table the night I told them I was leaving school. I'm not dropping out to quit. I'm dropping out to build. He stared at me like I'd announced I was moving into a tree. You are not going to throw away your future for an online hustle, he said flatly. No daughter of mine will be a gig worker for the rest of her life. Gerald, my mom murmured, because that's what she always said when she agreed with him, but didn't want to hear the argument. I left anyway, with $1,900 in my account, a futon that smelled faintly of popcorn, and a stubborn, glowing certainty that if I failed, at least I would fail honestly. I failed a lot. My first version of a business was a dropship shop that looked decent on Instagram and fell apart the minute a customer opened a box and found a mug with the handle glued on upside down. Lesson 1. If you don't touch your product, you can't vouch for it. I refunded people until I was broke, wrote apology notes at midnight, and learned the words quality control the hard way. Round two was a social media service where I promised boutique owners the moon for $99 a month because I was scared of charging what my time was worth. Lesson two: selling yourself short doesn't make the work easier, it just makes the resentment louder. I burned out in 4 months and crawled back to the futon with ramen and a headache. Round three was handmade jewelry. I loved the making and hated the reality that I could only make so many brass cuffs with my two hands. Lesson three: if it can't scale without breaking you, it's a hobby, not a business. I had just wrapped my pride in a thrift store blanket and was trying to figure out how to tell my parents they had been right when I met a woman who changed everything. Her name was Marisol Vega. She was 48, had a laugh you could hear down a hallway, and had sold two companies most people in Wichita used without knowing her name. I met her at a local entrepreneurs meetup I almost didn't attend because I was embarrassed by my track record. I asked a question about customer service at scale, and she waited for the rest of the room to start talking before she looked right at me and said, "You're building upside down. Start with the people who make the thing, then give them a stage." We got coffee the next morning. She listened like a mirror, reflecting back what I didn't yet know I was saying. "This is your pattern," she said. "You're good with people. You solve problems. You hate waste. So stop trying to sell stuff you can't stand behind. Build the bridge between folks who make remarkable things and folks who want to buy them without a middleman taking all the joy." The name came to me while I was stirring a pot of beans in my studio apartment. Rust and Amp. River. Rust for the honest marks of a thing well used. River for motion, for connection, for flow. The idea was simple and enormous. I'd build an e-commerce marketplace that connected independent American makers, blacksmiths, ceramicists, small clothing brands, candle pourers, leather workers, to customers who valued craft over trend. I wouldn't take ownership of their stock. I'd give them a platform that didn't drown them under algorithm changes and a brand voice that sounded like a human, not a factory. I learned to code the way you learn to dance in your kitchen, awkward and joyful. I traded a local developer 3 months of content for 30 hours of help. I turned one half of my apartment into a command center, laptop on a salvaged workbench, shipping supplies stacked in milk crates, a whiteboard with hand-drawn funnels, sticky notes everywhere. I slept on the other half of the futon and got up at 5 to email makers whose work I admired. The first to sign on was a knife maker from Nebraska who sanded handles until they felt like river stones. Then a soap company from Alabama that used goat milk from their own herd. A woman in upstate New York who sewed waxed canvas aprons strong enough to stand upright. I wrote their stories like love letters, shot photos on a borrowed DSLR, and shipped samples in boxes lined with craft paper and twine because it mattered to me that opening a package felt like being known. 8 months in, a home and homestead blogger with a huge audience ordered one of our aprons and posted an unprompted video that started with "Y'all." I just opened the most thoughtful box. Overnight, our inbox turned into a gushing hydrant. The site creaked. I sat cross-legged on the floor with my computer on an overturned laundry basket, refreshing order counts and crying quietly while I printed labels until my cheap printer begged for mercy. We made $11,400 in 3 days. I have never, before or since, been so happily exhausted. "Dad," I said on the phone, breathless with a secret, "it's working." "That's fine," he replied, as if I'd told him I got a nice parking spot. But those things fizzle out. Remember that time your cousin sold skincare? Focus on a degree, Mara. Build a foundation. I could have argued. I didn't. I let the work speak for me. It did. The next 5 years were a kaleidoscope, beautiful, dizzying, occasionally nauseating. I hired my first employee, Jules, who could calm any customer with a single email. We outgrew my apartment and moved into a narrow brick space downtown that had once been a bakery. You could still smell sugar when the AC kicked on. I signed our first 30 sellers, then 100, then 400. We built a system that mapped inventory in real time across dozens of small studios so we didn't oversell a single mug. We learned how to bundle items from 3 different makers into one happy experience at the customer's door. We wrote maker bios that made people cry. We almost died twice. The first near death was a cash flow choke in year 2. We were growing like a weed in good soil, and the timing between paying makers and money clearing from customers could have strangled us. I didn't take a salary for 4 months. I sold my car and rode an electric scooter to the office to cut costs. I negotiated extended payment terms with every vendor who would take my call. I learned to interpret a cash flow statement like it was a weather map. Storms gathering here, clear skies if we could just get through Tuesday. We did. The second was a server crash during a holiday sale. The site went dark for 6 hours on the single biggest shopping day of the year. I learned what redundant load balancing and hot failover meant while I ate cold pizza and begged a server farm in another state to prioritize us. I answered every single "what happened to my cart" email under my own name. We survived. Customers wrote back saying, "Thanks for telling the truth." I'm still in. Along the way, I kept a secret that grew heavier the longer I carried it. I was quietly covering family emergencies like a ghost owner. When my mother was diagnosed and needed radiation not fully covered by insurance, a cashier's check arrived from an anonymous foundation with a return address that was a rented P.O. box, $68,300. Dad thanked the foundation and told his bridge group how grateful he was that organizations like that existed. When Kyle and his wife hit a snag with their down payment, a legacy fund from a great uncle none of us remembered apparently came through with $90,000. My father raised a toast at Sunday dinner to the way our family takes care of our own. When Brittany's dream venue wouldn't hold her date without a deposit and her fiancé had just been laid off, a venue promotion, half the fee, and a contest she'd entered months ago covered the rest. I wrote the email pretending to be someone named Laurel. My sister cried and told me some people just have all the luck. I didn't do it for credit. I did it because I could and because it hurt less to be dismissed when I knew, in my gut, that they were walking on a floor I had reinforced. I told myself I was keeping peace. I told myself they would see me for who I was when I had a headline big enough to drown out their doubt. Rust and Anth. River hit $1 million in annual revenue midway through year 3. I bought 1 bottle of champagne, poured a paper cup for everyone, and raised a toast to the makers who made everything possible. Later that night, alone in the office, I cried into the sleeve of my cardigan because no one in my family had asked how my week had gone. We moved again, this time into a bright floor of a refurbished warehouse with windows as tall as hope. We built an internship program with stipends because unpaid labor is still labor. We offered health insurance and a mental health stipend before it was trendy. A publication called Founders Weekly ran a story about us called "The Marketplace for Makers That Refuses to Act Like a Marketplace." Investors called. I listened. I said no. I kept majority control because Rust and Anth. River had a soul, and I was not willing to sell it for a number and a promise. When my father's 66th birthday rolled around, I made a decision that felt more like a dare. I would tell the truth. I would bring a gift that reflected the way I loved him, practical, generous, forward-looking. And I would say aloud, in our dining room, exactly what I'd built. I set up a professionally managed retirement account in my father's name and funded it with an amount that would replace his salary if he wanted to ease into retirement. The paperwork, thick, official, neat, sat in a cream envelope with his name in my best handwriting. I told myself it would be a moment we'd talk about for years. I told myself this time they'd see me. My parents' house had barely changed since I was 12. Same beige sofa. Same lacquered cabinet with the good plates. Same coffee table with a tiny scratch from when Kyle and I sword fought with wrapping paper tubes. The biggest update was a colossal television my brother had gifted them, playing a muted news channel. The screensaver bounced across the room like a restless fish. The air smelled like my mother's Sunday roast, and the lemon cleaner she used a little too much of. "Hey, sis," Kyle said when I walked in, checking his watch like he had a train to catch. Brittany gave me a quick one-armed hug while showing off her new manicure. I brought a charcuterie board, she announced as if she had invented the concept. No one asked about my day. No one ever did. We made it through salad, too much dressing, the roast, perfect, and the story of how Kyle's son hit a triple in Little League, thrilling, apparently. When my mother cut the first sliver of cake and my father took a sip of his decaf, I felt my heart climb into my throat like a climber reaching for a ledge. Dad, Mom, I began, my voice steady because I made it be steady. I have some news. My father wiped his mouth with his napkin and sat back in his chair the way judges do on TV shows. Rust and Amp. River was recently valued at $24 million, I said. We were featured in Founders Weekly and we've gotten acquisition offers. I turned them down because I want to keep building. We have 42 employees, and we partner with over 500 makers in all 50 states. Silence. It was the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of your own breathing. My mother's fork hovered over her plate like a dragonfly over a pond. Brittany blinked. Kyle pressed his lips into a line like that, somehow, proved his superiority. My father frowned, the kind of frown that says he's searching for a category in his internal card catalog and can't find it. Valuation is just a number, Mara, he said finally. Internet companies inflate everything. How much profit? How much cash? How many of those? What do you call them? Influencers are you paying to talk about you? It's not inflated, I said quietly. And then, because I have always had a bad habit of trying to build a staircase for people to climb toward me, I started to explain our revenue streams, the maker commission model, the retention rates, the specifics of our logistics. I watched it bounce off him like hail on a tin roof. Kyle cut in. So you got lucky with viral posts. That's fine. But some of us chose real careers. Real? I asked, still calm, but colder now. You know what I mean, he replied, shrugging, using a voice men use when they want to sound reasonable while they're dismissing you. Credentials. Stability. You can hang everything on a website and vibes. I worked 7 years, 18 hours a day, I said. Luck doesn't do that. People do. My mother smiled the way church ladies smile when they want you to stop talking. Sweetie, that's wonderful. It would still be nice to finish your degree. Education is something no one can take away. I reached for the envelope with the retirement paperwork and slid it toward my father. I brought this for you, I said. It's set up in your name. I wanted you to have options. To rest when you want to know you're safe. He opened the envelope. His eyes flicked across the letters and numbers. Instead of softening, his face went hard. He put the papers back in the envelope as if they burned. What is this? He asked. The dangerous quiet had entered his voice. Some performance? Some power move? No, I said. I could feel heat rising in my neck. It's a gift. Like you gave your mother's medical foundation money? Kyle asked suddenly. He knew that tone because he used it. He'd found the thread and pulled. My stomach dropped. Kyle and the down payment from Great Uncle What's His Name. He continued, a nasty glint in his eye. Was that you too? Playing fairy godmother. Brittany's head snapped toward me, wedding rings clinking against her champagne flute. Wait. The venue discount. My secret life landed on the table with the cake. I had nothing left to keep it in the air. Yes, I said. It was me. I didn't want applause. I wanted to help. You wanted to feel big, my father said, standing. His chair scraped loud enough to make my mother jump. You wanted to buy your way into respect you didn't earn. I stood too, because I will not be yelled at while sitting. I earned every cent. I was trying to love you the way you understand love by paying bills. He laughed, sharp and ugly. You think money makes you better than your family? You think throwing cash at us gives you a right to come in here and brag about your little website? Gerald, my mother said, her hand halfway to his arm. Please, he didn't look at her. He looked at me the way you look at someone you're done with. You're a dropout with a lucky break, he said, louder now, voice straining. You're still nothing but a kid who couldn't stick with the plan. Get out of my house, Mara. Take your performance and get out. It felt like a slap. The room blurred. My throat closed. I picked up my coat. For a wild second, I thought maybe he'd block the door with his body, like in the movies, and shout that he didn't mean it. He didn't move. Happy birthday, I said. It came out softer than I meant it to. No one followed me down the front walk. The porch light clicked off before I reached my car. I sat in my hotel room that night with the television on mute and the ocean of carpet stretching in every direction and did math to stay sane. I listed, line by line, the money I had sent like a ghost, convincing myself that numbers are a kind of truth. $68,300 to St. Bernadette Cancer Center, $90,000 to Heartland Bank Escrow, $47,500 to a reception hall and caterer, $18,200 to fix my father's transmission and replace his tires, $29,400 for my mother's kitchen when the sink burst and the insurance fought them, holiday money, field trip money, late fee money. I stopped when I crossed $270,000, not because I ran out, but because it no longer mattered. My phone buzzed. A message from Brittany lit the screen. Dad will settle down. You know how he gets. Maybe don't throw it in his face next time. Proud of you, though. The exclamation point hit like a tack. I didn't reply. The next morning, I found a therapist online who had availability for a virtual session that afternoon and was willing to listen without taking sides. Her name was Dr. Elise Rudding. She wore a navy cardigan and spoke like the ocean, steady and patient. Sometimes success destabilizes a system that depends on you staying small, she said, after I poured the evening into the space between us. What you heard last night wasn't about facts. It was about a hierarchy your parents built to feel safe. You stepped outside of it. I tried to step outside of it and carry them with me, I said. I thought if I made the path smooth enough, you can't lower the mountain so everyone else doesn't have to climb, she said. You can build a trail. You can rest. You can set a boundary. But you can't make some people feel comfortable with your growth. 7 days later, I packed what felt like a past life into boxes and arranged for movers to do the rest. The previous year, I had purchased a house in Santa Barbara, California, as an investment, a place to run writing retreats for makers, and an excuse to escape the Midwestern winter once in a while. I'd barely spend a week there. Now, it called to me the way a deep breath calls to someone who's been underwater too long. The house sat on a low bluff washed by light, with glass that made the Pacific look like a painting framed by white walls. It wasn't the most expensive house on the street. It was the one that felt like I could exhale in it. When I arrived, the decor said vacation rental, beautiful in a catalog, impersonal in real life. I fixed that fast. Down came the generic prints. Up went framed fiber art from a weaver in Vermont, a photograph of a Montana silversmith's hands, a series of tiny oil paintings from a 23-year-old in Missoula who still couldn't believe people bought his work. The first night, I slept with the slider cracked and woke to the sound of gulls and the smell of salt. I took my coffee outside and sat until the sun climbed high and a pelican sketched a line across the sky like an underscore. I decided to rebuild myself the way I rebuild a site after a crash, gently, with backups, with better architecture, with redundancy for the fragile parts. I found a neighborhood coffee shop called Poppy and Amp, run by a family who knew what community felt like, your name written on a cup before you reached the counter by the second week. I joined a women's business circle that met under a pergola once a month and talked about P and Anth, L statements, and imposter syndrome with equal seriousness. I adopted a dog named Siggy from the shelter, a salt and pepper terrier mixed with one ear that never quite stood up straight, who loved me with uncomplicated devotion and watched surf videos like they were important policy updates. Running Rust and Amp, River from the Pacific turned out to be easier than I feared and harder in the ways that mattered. I had to get good at trusting people to do the work I hired them to do. Turns out they were waiting for me to stop trying to catch everything. You feel lighter, my operations director, Malik, said during our first all-hands on Zoom from my kitchen. Like you finally put down a toolbox you didn't need to carry. We piloted a work-from-anywhere for a quarter program that let anyone on the team pick a place, near a grandmother, in the mountains, by a lake, so long as they were 2 time zones from someone else on their team. Productivity went up. So did the number of photos on Slack featuring dogs in meetings. I didn't miss Wichita. I missed the version of family I thought we could be. The ache was a weather system, sometimes a drizzle I could ignore, sometimes a storm that sent me to bed at 9 with tea and a podcast, so I wouldn't replay every sentence from that dinner until I could hear the wallpaper hum. 3 weeks after I moved, I opened my phone to a text from my friend Eliza, who owned a small art gallery on State Street. You made page 2. The Santa Barbara Ledger had profiled coastal CEOs bringing jobs to town. There I was, barefoot on my deck, jeans rolled, Ziggy at my heels, under a headline that felt like a dare. From dropout to dealmaker. How a Santa Barbara transplant built a national marketplace for makers. The reporter had done their homework. The piece highlighted our commission model, our ethical sourcing, our local hiring, our mentorship program for young artisans. The photo made me look like the kind of person who wears sunscreen and boundaries. I didn't pitch it. Public records and a curious reporter did what reporters do. I let it ride. I didn't have the energy to manage anyone else's narrative anymore. The story ricocheted. Founders Weekly retweeted it. A VC I'd turned down wrote a snarky "my mistake" comment. A downtown magazine did a follow-up. Then, because the internet loves a hometown angle, the Wichita Beacon ran a piece titled, "Wichita Natives Company Goes National." It was light on details, heavy on pride. People from high school I hadn't thought about in a decade messaged to say, "Always knew you'd do something," which was hilarious in a gentle way because no one had said that when it mattered. And then my mother texted, "Saw your article. Very proud, dear. Dad and I had no idea things were going so well. Maybe we could come visit? We miss you." Miss me? Or miss the version of me that distributed money without being seen? I didn't answer immediately. I called Dr. Redding instead. "You can decline," she said. "You can agree to see them with ground rules. You can postpone. You can insist on a conversation about what happened before any sightseeing. None of these choices is wrong. Which one is kindest to you?" I texted my mother back. "If you and Dad come, it has to be to talk honestly about the dinner. We can't skip it and pretend. If you're willing, I'll make reservations near the water. And I'd like you to stay at a hotel, not at my house. I need that boundary." "Of course," she wrote. "We just want to put it behind us and be a family again." Putting it behind us was the problem. Putting it between us and looking at it, really looking, that was the ask. They arrived on a Tuesday. Santa Barbara's version of perfect, 70 degrees, a breeze that made the palms gossip. I chose a restaurant that served fish tacos and sat 3 minutes walk from the pier because I wanted neutral ground and the ocean's hum to moderate whatever needed moderating. They looked smaller. That was the first thing I noticed. Or maybe I had grown. Dad wore a button-down and a sports coat like he had a meeting. Mom wore a church dress and clutched her purse like a shield. They both smiled like a photograph. "California suits you," Dad said, eyes flicking to my sandals, my clean, unalarmed posture. "Thanks," I said. I didn't offer more. I have learned that filling silence is how I get trapped. We ordered. Fried calamari. 2 tacos each. I kept my hands around my water glass like a talisman. Dad cleared his throat. About my birthday, he began. The words dragged across gravel. I said things I shouldn't have. It was a surprise. I don't like surprises. I don't either, I said evenly. You told me to get out of your house and called me a dropout pretending to be somebody. He flinched. He didn't say I was wrong. He didn't say I was right. He said, "It wasn't about your success. It was about how you made us feel." Here we were again, feelings. Hierarchy. Power. The table is stage. "I didn't make you feel anything," I said. "I told you the truth and gave you a gift that would have helped you rest. You decided what that meant." My mother leaned in, eyes glossy. "We felt, shown up," she admitted, in a whisper so soft I had to watch her lips to follow. "We have always preached education. And you," she looked at the ocean for a second, as if the right words were out there, "you proved we might have been wrong about the only thing we were sure of." That's hard, Mara. I get that, I said. And I do. It is hard to realize the map you used was missing roads. It's also hard to build something brick by brick and have the people you love decide if the cardboard set. Dad glanced down at his plate. When he looked up, the softness I'd hoped for didn't materialize. "We want to move forward," he said instead, using the voice of a man who closes arguments like folders. I nodded. "Then we start with this. No dismissing what I've built, and no pretending words weren't said. We talk about them. We don't repeat them. And we respect boundaries." They both nodded. It was that kind of nod that says, I agree to the terms without processing the spirit. After lunch, they followed me in their rental car to my neighborhood. I watched them in the rearview mirror as we turned down a street lined with pepper trees that shed pieces of red lace. When I pulled into my drive and opened the gate, I could feel their curiosity press up against it like wind. The look on my father's face when he stepped inside wasn't about money. It was about evidence. He had built his life on the rule that without a degree, you would always be behind. Here was his counterexample with an ocean view. "It's nice," he said, strangling the word until it sounded like surrender. My mother touched a bowl on the entry table, tracing the ripple in the clay with one finger. "Did you make this?" she asked, a real question, genuine. "Ruth did," I said, relieved. "She throws stoneware in Oregon." We walked through rooms like tourists in a new country. I pointed out the pieces, not the price. The hand-loomed runner from Tennessee, the forged iron hooks from Missouri, the coffee table made from a salvaged beam in Michigan. "This is what Rust and Anth River does," I said. "We tell the story of what people's hands can do." On the deck, we sat in chairs that made my posture good. The ocean did what it always does. It showed off. "I am sorry," my father said finally, after a long minute. The words were ragged, the way a rope is frayed right before it gives. I shouldn't have said what I said. Not like that, not ever. It was not the apology I had imagined when I was a little girl learning to apologize for things that weren't my fault. It wasn't thorough. It wasn't reflective. It existed. That mattered. What hurt most, I said carefully, was realizing that even if I cured a disease, you'd still ask where the diploma was. My mother reached toward me, stopped, placed her hand flat on the table instead. "I thought school was the only thing no one could take," she said. Then I watched a school board try to take books from my library and realized we were wrong about what's safe. Maybe the only safe thing is your own grit, and I didn't honor yours. We didn't fix anything that day. We built a landing pad for conversations that might, someday, fix something. I told them they would stay at the hotel like we'd planned. I hugged my mother longer than my father. When they drove away, I watched until their car disappeared around the corner and was honest with myself. I felt heavy relief and a small sorrow. Both could live here. I didn't have to choose. A week later, my brother showed up. He didn't text. He didn't call. He knocked, took in the view, and whistled the way men do when they want you to know they're impressed and annoyed. "Nice setup," he said, wandering toward the glass as if he owned it. "Santa Barbara suits you. What do you want, Kyle?" I asked, because there is hardly ever another reason he visits. He grinned like a salesman. "Investment opportunity. Ground floor." I thought, "We're family, maybe you'd like to know," I said. "Clear. Clean." His smile fell off like a sticker losing stick. "Dad says you've changed," he muttered. "Dad's right," I said. I stopped mistaking family for obligation. I stopped paying tuition for respect. He left angry and lighter because he didn't have to pretend we were anything else. I made tea and didn't shake. The day after, I called the community college I'd bailed on at 19. I set up the Quinn Initiative. 5 full-ride scholarships for non-traditional entrepreneurs every year, plus a mentorship circle that paired them with business owners who had more scars than plaques. "Make sure the application for the scholarship has a place for someone to tell a story," I said. "Not just grades. Show me someone who's built something out of duct tape and deadline." In the months that followed, my life settled into a rhythm that felt like health. Mornings on the beach with Ziggy, afternoons on strategy calls with Malik and Jules and our product lead, evenings with friends who liked me for my presence, not my resume. My circle here was a quilt of women who ran restaurants and podcasts and surf shops and small funds that backed women-owned food trucks. We gathered on my deck on Thursdays, passed bowls of roasted vegetables and platters of fish, and told the truth about cash flow and childcare and the way success can be lonelier than failure if you don't name it. Rust and Amp, River thrived. We launched a small batch wholesale program for indie boutiques terrified of giant retailers and showed them how to cure it with soul. We built a studio at the back of my house where makers passing through could shoot product photography on an ocean day instead of a gray one. I flew back to Kansas once a quarter, stayed in a hotel, had coffee with my parents in public places, and left before old rhythms could reach long enough to grab my ankles. There were regressions. My father sometimes said things like, "Of course," until the trend changes, and I had to remind him with one eyebrow that I don't speak diminishing. My mother sometimes tried to triangulate me with Brittany or Kyle, and I had to step out of the shape. There were also small miracles. The text from my mother with a photo of a ceramic bowl she made in a class, her caption reading, "Perfection is boring," the voicemail from my father asking for the name of an artist I'd featured because your mother really likes the way she glazes blue. The night that marked 1 year since I carried my suitcase out of my parents' house, I hosted a long table on my deck. Edison bulbs overhead. Napkins that didn't match on purpose. A playlist that sounded like old records and new beginnings. Eliza raised a glass and toasted to chosen family and to what happens when women stop auditioning for rooms that don't want them anyway. We laughed. We ate. We watched dolphins carve silver lines into the water. I didn't think about degrees once. Here's what I can tell you from the other side of a door I used to press my ear against. Success won't heal a wound that needs a boundary. Money won't buy respect from someone who's invested in not giving it. And you can love your people without letting them live rent-free in your head. If someone you love calls you a name, writes you into a small sentence, or orders you out of a room because you refuse to shrink, listen to that as data, not destiny. You are allowed to step into a different story. You are allowed to decorate it with quilts and clay bowls and dogs with one floppy ear. You are allowed to invite people in with rules that keep your furniture and your heart intact. Have you ever had to choose between a laminated plan and the messy, sparkling one that called your actual name? Tell me where you're listening from, and if my story rang any bells in your chest, hit like and subscribe. There's more where this came from, more proof that there are as many kinds of success as there are people who refuse to wait for permission.